You're listening to Player Development, a channel focused on the intersection of sports and character growth. Please like and subscribe to support the stories being shared, the growth of our listeners, and to stay up to date with our latest content. Our interview today is with Colton McGriff. He was a basketball player at Covenant College and was pursuing a professional career in basketball when those dreams were sidetracked by a major diagnosis. Listen on as Colton reflects on how he's seen God working through the entirety of his life to prepare him for this and future challenges. All right, Colton, thanks for joining me today to share some of your story. Appreciate you being here today.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate it, Isaiah, for having me.
Yeah, man. So let's just get started. If you could please share some of your sports background and some of your current involvement in sports.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I guess growing up, I played as many sports as possible. So I would play soccer, baseball, and basketball were my three main sports. And I think early on I was a big baseball fan, probably until age 12, and then it shifted a little bit towards basketball. So, I mean, my sports career has always been fairly diverse in that sense, just playing year-round a different type of sport. And then I guess currently I'm still playing a little bit in church league basketball and helping out some with a local high school. So doing some volunteer work, just coaching.
Really? Now, I know that you experienced a pretty major shock being diagnosed with MS. For those of us who are unfamiliar, what is MS? What's the story behind how you got to this diagnosis?
Yeah, so I'll start by just, I guess, explaining how it all started with, so I graduated, from Covenant College in 2015 and was looking to continue my basketball career professionally. So I tried out for this team called USA Select and was able to go over to England for a 21-day period where we were going to play professional teams in their preseason. So during a 21-day stretch, we had 24 games planned where the goal was for each of us to essentially audition during the preseason of this league to hopefully get a spot, like one of the last roster spots for each team. So with that opportunity, I was super excited, probably playing the best basketball of my life. And about a week before we went on the trip, I started to develop this numbness in my hands that I just couldn't shake. And it was getting more and more difficult for me to just simply catch a basketball, take more than one or two dribbles. And so I was going over on this team specifically because I was supposed to be a good shooter, which is funny because during the 21-day audition that I had, I probably airballed more shots than I have in my entire career. And so I knew that something was wrong. And so I guess the biggest thing for me is I had to adapt my game and do different things while I wasn't having the full feeling in my hands. And so once I came back, just to get testing and figure out what was going on, like you mentioned, I was diagnosed with MS, which is multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease that affects the central nervous system. So basically it just disrupts the flow of information from your brain to the rest of your body. And so I guess we can talk a little bit more about the reaction from that, but that was a pretty big hit at the time. And during all this, I was still able to find a team that was willing to sign me on and offer me a spot to pursue my master's degree in England. And so I was basically blessed with that opportunity despite the MS diagnosis.
Yeah. So you kind of hinted at that. How did you respond initially when you first heard the news?
Yeah. So I guess the response, I can trace it back to really when I was 7 years old. I was taught by my parents I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So I had a pretty big event early in my life where I was fortunate to have parents that didn't let me feel sorry for myself in any way. Instead, they essentially celebrated the diagnosis of diabetes, saying, "Hey, this is something that you can control, and you've got the opportunity to basically take health into your own hands and not play the victim here." And so, because of that, I think 15 years later, when I'm diagnosed with this new challenge, I go back to the same process, which is, all right, how am I going to respond to this? The medical community is saying that there's no cure for this, and it's just going to be a slowly progressive thing to the point where eventually you're likely going to be in a wheelchair. And I mean, it's a very grim outlook when you go and get a diagnosis for MS. So I think my response initially was, there's definitely a period where there's some sadness or some unknown, but I think because of the early diagnosis of diabetes, I was able to respond maybe quicker than I could have otherwise.
Yeah. I imagine like being an athlete and, even looking to maybe make your living based off of what your body can do, that must have been really scary to hear at first.
Yeah, it definitely was. So, but I think, I guess I can share a little bit about just what the diagnosis looked like and then what the response was, because I guess with the modern Western medicine, with MS specifically, like I said, there's no treatment there's no cure currently. And so the treatment is essentially you'll take these immunosuppressant drugs and slow the progression of the disease, because I was told when I was first diagnosed that on average with MS, you're going to be in a wheelchair within 10 years of the diagnosis if left untreated. And so obviously there's a lot of fear that's put into you right there that says, hey, I've got to, maybe I should do this treatment. I should do something to slow it down. And so I think that's just the way that they very quickly lead you into something. And then with such a strong, I guess, mandate or a process to go about this disease, it's like immediately we started looking for alternative solutions that may be a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think that's where we ended up finding some doctors that had treated MS. And when I say we, again, my parents played a crucial role in this and were able to help me find some doctors out in California, actually, that had treated MS strictly with food-related changes. And so to me, it seemed like a big deal at first, but not so much so that it would counter the chance of being in a wheelchair within 10 years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like you said, you ended up going with a less traditional approach to combating this disease in your body. So tell us about the thought process and maybe kind of some of the specific things that you changed.
Yeah, so I guess the key thing that I did change was I'm strictly since October of 2015 I've been on strictly a plant-based diet. And so I guess that the easiest way for most people everybody's heard of like a vegan diet, and so it's essentially a vegan diet with limited oil intake as well. And so what some doctors have learned over the process of treating MS through the diet-based approach is the amount of saturated fat that's in our typical diet is actually causing a greater chance of inflammation and future lesions in the brain, which is what's so important for MS. Like, as lesions increase, then it restricts the ability for outer extremities to work. So whether it's your numbness in my hands like I developed at first, or feet, or something in the future. And that's why the wheelchair, it's just a very progressive disease that over time kind of just takes over. So I guess to me, looking back, it's like it was a big change to go from the diet that I was eating to this very strict and I don't know, I guess just a very different diet. That's the biggest thing. It's just the change, and now I see it as a blessing that hey, I had this opportunity to change, and I did, and now I'm seeing the results of what that looks like.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing some of that. And one question that just came up for me, I know for athletes, you talk about protein intake, especially if you're working out regularly, playing ball regularly. And I think that's one of the hurdles for a lot of athletes. So there are a lot of recommendations for like more plant-based food. How do you get your protein on a regular basis?
Yeah, that was actually one of my big questions when I first started because like you said, there's so much information out there about increasing the amount of protein, and then maybe increasing the amount of just like after workout, protein shakes, that kind of stuff. But I guess what I realized is that a lot of that is actually driven, through the meat and the dairy industries that are promoting this protein with like a workout type mentality. And I think a lot of that it's been debunked through a lot of science and the research behind it. And one of the cool things for me is about a year and a half or 2 years after I started this diet, a lot of those questions still existed in my mind, but there's a really cool documentary called Game Changers. I think it's available on Netflix, and it kind of addressed some of the top performing athletes in the world, including some bodybuilders that have gone plant-based, and what their experience has been like and why the protein side of thing is a little bit probably over talked about. And it's something that, I mean, you still need your protein, but maybe the emphasis that we put on it is a little bit too strong. So I would recommend if anybody is thinking about making a change or even just wants to look into the role that diet plays on sport, to watch that movie Game Changers.
Got it. Sounds like a good recommendation. And so you started talking about that. I know a lot of the athletes will look to alter their diet for health reasons. So after you've made, like you said, this really dramatic change a couple of years back, what have the results been like for you, both health and fitness-wise?
Yeah, so I mean, the results have been amazing for me because just from a health standpoint with the MS diagnosis, we were also told if left untreated that I would have a relapse. So it could be numbness in my hands the next time. It could be something else, like I mentioned before. But I would have a relapse every 9 months on average again. And if I took the drugs that they were recommending, then it would drop to around 12 to 15 months. And so since my diagnosis in October of 2015, it's been now 67 months, and I've had 0 extra relapses. So from a health standpoint, just with looking at MS, it's been phenomenal, where I haven't had a single relapse, and I've actually done a better job because of this diagnosis and changing my diet with my diabetes as well. And so after having diabetes for 15 years, now I'm having the best blood sugar numbers in the last 5 years of my life. So from a health perspective, it's been amazing. And then from a sports related, it's a little bit tougher to compare just because I'm not playing basketball as much as I used to. So it may be more running and things where I feel like I have more endurance, but again, I wasn't doing long distance running while I was playing basketball like at a serious level. So it's kind of transitioned to sport. So it's a little bit harder to tell, but I would definitely say that I have more endurance.
Fair enough. And yeah, congratulations. That is really amazing to hear. You said like, what was it, 67 months and no relapses in that time period. Just absolutely blew out any of the prognosis that the doctors would have given you earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
So thinking back now, I know, like you said, this is kind of a long-term diagnosis. But as far as you've got at this point, why has it been important that you experience this challenge that much?
Well, I think that's an interesting question because I ask myself that sometimes, and it's easy when somebody asks themselves, why did this happen to me, to slip into a why me, or why did this have to happen to me? I had my life planned out or something along those lines. But I was reading a book, recently, and there was a quote from it that said, we learn our lessons with the tickle of a feather or the whomp of a sledgehammer, depending on how open we are to learning that particular lesson. And so I look back at my life and I think, okay, maybe my diabetes diagnosis was that tickle of the feather and I had something to learn, but maybe I didn't fully learn what I was supposed to take from it. So maybe my diet needed to change in another way. So I learned a lot from a mental aspect of, hey, I can be in control. I can take care of my own life and be in control of how my health turns out because of the advances in modern medicine through insulin availability and just being able to treat. But could I have taken that next step? And I think that's where, okay, now I have an MS diagnosis and I'm actually very thankful for it because maybe again, it was another tickle and it was before the whomp of the sledgehammer, which like in America, the leading cause of death is heart disease every year. And it's always that way. So maybe that's the whomp of the sledgehammer and I avoided that because I've now changed my diet in a way that, so we don't know. I mean, looking forward, we don't know the end result, but I'm thankful for the changes that I've made and some of the changes I've seen in people that are close to me, including family members that have also had a benefit from change in health habits.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And, for anyone who is listening to this, for athletes who are coming up, what recommendation might you have for them based on what you've learned over these past few years?
Yeah, so again, I mean, what I've done is probably a little bit on the extreme just because I was in a situation where it was pretty drastic. Like, I'm not going to make a small change here. It's either going to be all or nothing. But again, I would go back to if I would have read one book maybe when I was 15 years old and implemented some of the changes in it, then I'll know that I would be in this situation. And that book is called Fit for Life. It's written by Harvey Diamond. And so Harvey Diamond, just a little bit of his backstory. Harvey Diamond is a Vietnam war veteran, and he was exposed to Agent Orange over there and was actually the longest known living American after being diagnosed with Agent Orange. And it was because he started to look into diet and how it affects the human body and how we can make changes. And so I think that book would probably be my go-to book in terms of like learning just what kind of changes we could make in diet specifically in order to, live a more prosperous or a more productive life as an athlete.
All right. Sounds like it's definitely worth checking out. So I'll leave the ball in your court here, Colton, for any final thoughts that you might have that you want to leave us with.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say, I think the biggest thing for me is, as a believer, and I think you can share with me on this, is we're always trying in our life to plan our future out so much so. And I think the biggest thing for me is realizing that we can't always connect the dots looking forward, but looking back we can. So you can always connect the dots looking back. And so, like with my story, being diagnosed with diabetes at age 7, and then that led to developing the mental attitude or the acumen, the ability to be able to fight something new when I'm 22 years old. And so is that going to be the end of my story? I highly doubt it. I expect something else to happen. And so with the expectation that life is going to hit you, but we're equipped and God's preparing us for that along the way, I think that's really my biggest takeaway from my story and my journey is to just trust in what God has for us and the future that He will display for us.